side now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we're all here. So we can go ahead and get started. So I guess first thing on the agenda, I'd like to call the Thursday, January 21st, 2021 meeting of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners Mule Deer Enhancement Program Management Area 15 Subcommittee to order at 5:06 p.m. Thank you all very much for your interest and willing to participate in this team. Originally, we had envisioned a much less formal process of just getting together with these local working groups to meet and discuss issues with respect to mule deer in our areas. But we were informed that we had to go forward as an official subcommittee. So we're now subject to these open meeting laws. And because of this, we'll have to go through a bit more of a formal process, kind of similar to what we do in the CAB meetings. And we're also allowing public attendance. So if you notice that there's panelists and attendees, the attendees are the public that can come watch this meeting. Also, the meeting will be recorded, so just keep that in mind as well. And Tom will get into a little bit more detail about the more formal process a bit later. But to get started, we will go ahead and take roll call. So I'll pass it over to Tom for that. And just raise your hand or say here when he calls your name.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to do this kind of alphabetical here. So I guess this will be a semi-introduction as well. So everybody gets to say a little something. Amber Ayton.
I'm here.
All right. Welcome. Bert Ramos.
I'm here.
Chris Jasmine.
Present.
All right. Jeremy Lutz.
Here.
Jerry Annis.
Tom, I thought you said it was going to be alphabetical.
By first name, Jerry.
Okay. All right.
Marshall Everson.
Here.
Sarah Hale.
Here.
And Scott Torgerson.
How come I'm always last?
I don't know. Something you might want to take up with your mom.
The best for last. All right, I'm here.
And just a quick reminder too, despite my comment to Scott just now, we are required to take minutes of these meetings. So this meeting is being recorded, and it will be up on the NDOW website on the committee page, so folks can come and look at this afterwards. So if there's other folks you know of that might be interested that couldn't make the meeting, public, some members of the public or something, you can always direct them to that website and they can take a look at the recording of this meeting. So on that note, I will disappear again.
Okay, so moving on to agenda item 2, approval of the agenda. The subcommittee will review the agenda and may take action to approve the agenda. The subcommittee may remove items from the agenda, combine items for consideration, or take items out of order. And the one change we want to make to the agenda is that we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. So this meeting will basically just be a presentation on issues with respect to Area 15's herd. And we are going to table the ranking of the top 3 factors and the discussion of potential projects for a later meeting. So we're just going to push those back to another meeting, and we'll talk about just what the process will be for those items, but we won't actually go through those. And so since this is an action item, we now have to take a quick break for public comment. So let's take a 3-minute break, and then we can come back and motion to approve those minutes or the agenda. And I forgot to mention, if you do have public comment, please email that to endowgame@gmail.com.
Anybody can hear me. I can't hear a word you guys are saying.
Yeah, we're just taking a 3-minute break for any public comment to get sent in. So no talking right now. Not missing anything.
I can't get you guys on my screen. All I can get is Nevada Board Commissions, Mule Deer Enhancement, Oversight Committee. So
Yeah, that's the screen that Cassandra's sharing. So that's what you should be seeing right now. You're all good.
all right, I'm not a computer guy.
No worries. I believe it's been about 3 minutes. Were there any comments, Tom?
Nope, we got no public comments at this time.
Great. I think we just need a motion and a second to approve the agenda and move on.
I would make a motion to approve the agenda with the clarification that we won't be voting on the priorities for the evening, just listening to the presentation.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say aye. All right, motion passes to approve the agenda and move on to the next item. So the next item on the agenda is just the report on the Mule Deer Enhancement Program. So I'm going to go through about a 30-minute presentation, and then we will allow some questions and discussion for the panelists. And then we'll take another quick break for public comment if there are any comments that people want to submit, and we'll go from there. So I will go ahead and pull up this presentation and share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Go ahead and dive in. The Western landscapes face a variety of challenges, including but not limited to wildfire, drought, severe winters, invasive species such as cheatgrass and wild horses, woody encroachment, and balancing different land uses such as grazing and mining with conservation. And I'm going to get into the specific factors that affect Area 15 a bit later, but first I want to go over a quick refresher on mule deer biology, the history of mule deer in Nevada, and the status of the Area 15 herd. So mule deer are browsers, meaning they consume mainly shrubs, but forbs and grasses are important in the spring and summer. They prefer to consume new growth and young plants because they are easier to digest and more palatable. And as plants age, their cell walls thicken, so there's more cellulose and lignin, and that becomes a little more difficult for the digestive system to break down. And also as they age, more of these secondary compounds, which are just naturally there to deter herbivores, build up over time, making them taste worse to herbivores. So these sagebrush ecosystems and earlier stages of succession are much better for deer. Mule deer benefit from a patchy pinyon juniper distribution because they can act as thermal cover and also cover from predators. But as the pinyon juniper encroaches and becomes more dense, it can actually outcompete important forage species in the understory, such as sagebrush and other forbs and grasses. Mule deer typically spend summers at higher elevations and migrate to lower elevations in winter. And some herds exhibit very long migrations in the winter. However, the Area 15 herd stays fairly local, so they mainly move within Area 15 during the winter. Prior to European settlement, there were very few mule deer actually in Nevada, but upon settlement, several activities began that inadvertently created mule deer habitat, and that was mining and grazing. Mining resulted in the removal of many stands of pinyon juniper, and that was for fuel and building. And grazing disturbed the landscape in a way that was much more favorable to a shrub ecosystem. So these two activities in combination favored the sagebrush ecosystem, which then flourished. And that inadvertent creation of habitat allowed mule deer to thrive throughout Nevada, including in Area 15. And just a reminder where Area 15 lies in the state. We're in north central Nevada, and the northern boundary follows I-80, and the southern boundary follows US 50. And you can see that State Route 305 runs down north to south, and 306 also runs down north to south. And in 2012, Unit 151 was broken into these three units, 151, 153, and 156, for better ease of management. So instead of that being one large unit, it's now separated into three. The status of the Area 15 mule deer herd, currently they're in decline, but we've seen variations in the past, kind of peaks and valleys, and several of these can be explained by specific factors. And this first large peak occurred right after the quota system was implemented in 1975. So mule deer take was greatly restricted, and there were very favorable weather conditions with wet springs and summers, high fawn ratios, and concurrently there was high predator take. Shortly after this peak, however, there was a severe winter in 1992 to 1993. So the population was hit really hard by that and declined and never quite recovered from that. More recently, this peak around 2012 was the result of above average precipitation in previous years. And you can see that on this graph where the blue bars represent precipitation, annual precipitation. And again, that black line is the estimated deer population. So this peak that I'm talking about happened right after this peak and kind of follows that same trend. However, this graph also illustrates that precipitation isn't the only factor driving this population. If it was, we would expect that population to have increased again following more recent above average rainfall. Moving on to some harvest data from this population, this graph shows harvest data since 1963, and each bar shows the total amount of deer harvested. They're broken down into does, which are represented in gray, fawns represented by black, and bucks represented by blue. So for example, this bar in 1963, there were about 750 animals taken. About 250 of those were does, and about 450 were bucks, and 30 were fawns. So that's how those bars are broken down. Also notable is how the Doe harvest went way down after that quota system was implemented in 1975. And since then, Doe harvests have mainly been for opportunity with things such as junior hunts, and also to reduce pressure on winter range in years that they're hitting that pretty hard. And one common misconception is that the decline in mule deer has been driven by NDOW issuing too many tags. So this graph is just depicting that population in comparison to harvest. And as you can see, harvest follows this population trend very closely. So we don't base tags off of this sample size that we get on our surveys, which is shown by these blue and green bars. And we base
Questions now
harvest
or later?
population and off of hunter success. So looking at more harvest data, the percent of bucks harvested that have been 4-point or better in Area 15 has remained relatively stable. So this dotted line shows the long-term average, and that's been about 39%. And you can see there's year-to-year variation, but overall this has remained about the same. So that shows that the number of bucks available that are 4-point or better has also remained fairly stable over time. When looking at the observed buck to doe ratio, that has also remained stable over time. And that makes sense because we do manage for a ratio of 30 bucks to 100 does. So you can see that this long-term average has remained right around that. So it's 0.28, and again, there's year-to-year variation, but overall it has remained around that management objective. What has changed, however, is the fawn to doe and fawn to adult ratios. And you can see those in these other colored bars. So the blue bar represents the fall fawn to doe ratio. The green is the fall fawn to adult ratio, and the purple is the spring fawn to adult ratio. And these are all obviously very closely related to one another, so they follow the same trend. And they are below average currently, and they have been kind of gradually declining over time. So it makes sense that if there are fewer fawns being recruited into the population, that we have seen a decline in the mule deer herd in Area 15. So just in summary, currently Area 15 has a declining mule deer population. And this is not limited to Area 15 or even Nevada, and range wide throughout the West. And this likely has been due to habitat degradation, which leads to poor body condition of animals and lower fecundity. So there are several factors that have led to ecosystem degradation. And the first that we will talk about in detail is altered fire regimes. So historically in the sagebrush ecosystem, fires burned between 20 and 300 years. And this would have created a mosaic of shrub stands on the landscape of different ages. So mule deer would have access to both young stands that had more nutritious forage and also older stands that provided better cover. So they would have benefited from this mosaic. However, these regimes have been shifted due to several factors. And first we'll talk about reduced fire frequency, which has been caused by human fire suppression and also grazing, removing some of that fine fuel that would have propagated fire through these systems. And reducing that fire frequency would lead to sagebrush senescence, which again would lead to those less palatable and less digestible plants becoming dominant on the landscape. And also in older plants, they have more of those secondary compounds that would have deterred herbivores. And so these can actually kill gut microbes in deer. So they might be consuming the same amount of forage, however, getting much less nutrition from those. Additionally, reduced fire frequency and reduced disturbance in general has allowed pinyon juniper encroachment into sagebrush ecosystems. And if you remember, pinyon juniper can outcompete sagebrush and grass, which then reduces forage that's available for deer. In contrast, other areas have seen an increased fire frequency, and this has mainly been due to cheatgrass invasion, which creates a cheatgrass fire cycle, and they can actually convert shrubland to annual grassland. And how this happens is actually through overgrazing a lot of the time. And this factor, I want to point out, the keyword is overgrazing. This isn't a dig at all livestock producers, just those that graze the landscape irresponsibly. And so, like I said, overgrazing has contributed to these shifts in fire regimes, and it can both increase and decrease fire frequency. And we'll look at how that happens here. So first, if we remove that grass understory through overgrazing, that would reduce the amount of fuel there was on the landscape to propagate those fires. So those stands would become dominated by shrubs instead of grasses. And if there's no cheatgrass seed bank nearby, shrubs will continue to age and senesce, and that will lead to the issues with nutrition and digestibility that we already talked about. However, if there is a cheatgrass seed bank, which much of Area 15 has, cheatgrass will colonize these areas that have been cleared by grazing, which will then propagate wildfire and will burn off sagebrush, because sagebrush isn't adapted to fire frequencies that cheatgrass causes. So in cheatgrass systems, fires burn every 3 to 5 years instead of that 20 to 300 year window that sagebrush is used to. So it can't withstand fires of those frequencies and will eventually die off and allow cheatgrass to dominate the area. And once that happens, more wildfires propagated, more cheatgrass comes into the area. So we get into that wildfire cheatgrass cycle that continues until cheatgrass is the dominant species on the landscape. So in addition to altering fire regimes, overgrazing can directly affect mule deer forage, especially if an area is grazed before seed development of grasses, which obviously would reduce grass propagation. And also cattle selectively graze on the same types of plants that mule deer prefer. So grasses and forbs that are critical in spring and summer could be removed from the landscape before deer have access to them. And cattle also choose to consume the more palatable parts of those shrubs that the deer prefer to consume. So they cause this direct competition for resources. And also removal of this land, or alteration of this landscape, can result in the reduction of fawn hiding cover, which increases energetic costs for thermoregulation and also increases the exposure to predators. Several other factors that lead to ecosystem degradation are human activities, such as the construction of homes, businesses, roads, and fences, which directly removes and fragments mule deer habitat and causes direct mortality through vehicular collisions and fence entanglements. Also, type conversion, which has taken place historically, can result in loss of shrubland. And this is just the reseeding of areas with crested wheatgrass, either after deliberate removal of shrubs for enhancement of livestock forage or after wildfire. And other significant factors that affect deer are climate change, which has led to more extreme weather events occurring, such as drought and severe winters, and also contributes to more intense wildfires. And as we're no stranger to, feral horses. Feral horses in the state are grossly overpopulated. The range can support up to about 13,000 horses. However, there are currently around 61,000 horses and burros on the landscape. And this is a problem because they degrade the range by trampling water sources and overgrazing, and also will aggressively defend water sources from other wildlife species. So now that we've kind of gone through that general list of factors that degrade ecosystems, we need to discuss what specifically is affecting Area 15. So first, Area 15 is currently considered to be in a severe to extreme drought. And you can see Area 15 outlined in black on this map, and it's completely filled with that orange and red, which is the severe and extreme drought. And Area 15 is no stranger to drought, and there have been many periods throughout history. So if we just look at the US Drought Monitor data since 2000, you can see that there have been many periods of drought throughout the state. And if we go back even further, this index goes all the way back to 1895. And wet years are shown in green, dry years are shown in yellow. What you can see is that there have been many periods of drought throughout history. However, more recently, those periods are becoming longer. So we've been in quite a few droughts recently. And these very dry conditions and the drought-prone climate make reliable water sources extremely important for wildlife. And this map is showing water sources in Area 15. The springs are shown in green, protected springs are shown in purple, streams and rivers are shown as blue lines, and endow guzzlers are shown as yellow dots. And endow guzzlers are just artificial water sources that have been constructed in areas lacking water, and they're fenced off to eliminate cattle and horse use and only allow wildlife access to these. And so they're a very important resource for wildlife. However, there's only 12 of those in Area 15, so natural sources still are very important to wildlife. However, many of the springs and streams in the area don't produce water year round, so perennial sources are extremely important to wildlife, but horses in the area can restrict access and also degrade those water sources. And this is just an example of horses chasing an elk off of a spring in Colorado. And then I have a few pictures that I've taken out on the landscape of springs in Area 15. This one's in the Toyabe Fingers, and you can see that it's extremely trampled. The barrier that had been protecting it has been knocked over, so it's no longer functioning. And it's just been completely overused by cattle and horses. This is another spring up near Moss Creek in a former sheep allotment. And you can see, again, it's devoid of vegetation around the spring. It's very trampled, and there are lots of deep, wide trails worn into the hillside that can facilitate erosion. This is Mound Spring near the OHV area, down 305, Shoshone OHV area. Again, you can see that it's extremely trampled, devoid of vegetation, and hit pretty hard by horses. So this widespread use of the landscape by horses is an issue in Area 15. This figure shows the herd management area, HMAs, and there are 6 of those in Area 15, and the appropriate management level has been exceeded in all of these. So all of these are at least double the percent AML they should be at, and most notably the Shoshone HMA number 6, that over 1,400%. And this map just shows additional herd areas, which are areas that horses use, but they are not managed by the BLM in those areas. And in total, you can see that these add up to the entire area being almost 4 times over the maximum AML. Another widespread issue in Area 15 is wildfire. About 500,000 acres have burned since the 1980s, and that's shown on this map. Different colors are different decades. And Area 15 is about 2.5 million acres in total. So about 20% of the area has burned. This has led to habitat loss and vegetation conversion in areas. And this map is just showing what vegetation zones should look like in Area 15. And you can see that much of the area should support sagebrush, and that's that sage green color that's widespread throughout the area. However, fires have facilitated cheatgrass invasion into the shrubland. And this map is showing cheatgrass canopy cover. And so the warmer colors represent areas that have greater canopy cover, and the green or darker green colors have less cover. And cheatgrass is extremely associated with fire. And if we put the fire boundaries back on this map, you can see almost all the areas that have a high canopy cover of cheatgrass have burned. So cheatgrass is extremely fire adapted and very associated with these burned areas. And the cheatgrass problem might not seem like that big of a deal outside of, say, Unit 152. However, when we look at the surrounding area, there is quite a bit of cheatgrass. So there is a good seed bank, and a fire could easily help spread that cheatgrass into the area. So cheatgrass is a very big issue throughout the area. And again, if we put those fire boundaries on, you can see just how closely associated cheatgrass is with fire. Alternatively, a lack of disturbance and fire has allowed pinyon juniper encroachment in certain areas. Again, pinyon juniper is naturally occurring, but it has encroached into the sagebrush ecosystem in some areas, which can then cause habitat degradation because it outcompetes the sagebrush and also native grasses and forbs. So there's several areas in Area 15 that NDOW has been focusing on pinyon juniper thinning, kind of in the McGinnis Hills area, the northern Toyabes, and the southern Simpson Parks. Also, despite having a very low human population, Area 15 experiences a high level of human activity through activities such as mining, energy development, agriculture, and grazing. And these activities directly remove habitat, fragment the landscape, and can contribute to a cheatgrass-dominated landscape if it allows cheatgrass to encroach into an area and then start that cheatgrass wildfire cycle. So this map is just showing mines in those orange polygons, geothermal facilities in the yellow diamonds, and grazing allotments in those hashed and checked polygons. So you can see that almost all of Area 15 has some form of human activity taking place on it. Additionally, there's an area of sections of formerly railroad-owned land that are being sold off to private owners. So that hashed checkerboard area up in the northern portion of this map shows private land and BLM land. And each of those private parcels was owned by the railroad and is being sold off. And that can cause issues when private property is fenced off, and that fencing can hinder mule deer movement throughout the area. So when we look at all of these issues independently, they might not seem they're causing that much of a problem on their own. However, if we look at the cumulative effects of all of these, we see a different picture. So if we remember cheatgrass, fires, juniper encroachment, which is now shown in purple, development, and grazing, you can see that almost all of Area 15 is affected by at least one issue, but most of it's affected by several of these issues at the same time. Just a quick note on predators. You might have noticed that I didn't discuss this as a major issue affecting Area 15. And that's mainly because there's been very conflicting evidence in the literature about how much predators actually affect deer, and their removal has various results and can depend on body condition of individuals, season, and also how close to carrying capacity the population is. So there's not a lot of agreement on whether or not predator removal actually affects mule deer. However, there is agreement that increased nutrition from improved habitat contributes to greater survival and population growth. And also access to escape cover increases juvenile survival greatly. So if we think about the escape cover issue, think about an aquarium that has a limited amount of cover. If a predator comes into that aquarium, only those individuals that can access cover will survive. And that'll be the same no matter the number of predators. Only those individuals that can access cover will survive on that landscape. So here, the population isn't being regulated by predators, it's being regulated by the amount of cover available. So focusing on long-term solutions that address the root cause of a problem, such as habitat degradation, instead of focusing on more short-term activities that will have to be repeated in perpetuity, such as removing coyotes, will be key going forward. And so some of these long-term solutions NDOW has already been working on, and this is just a snapshot of some projects of habitat restoration that NDOW has done in Area 15 since 2009. And you can see that over 25,000 acres have been treated and close to $2 million have been spent just on habitat restoration projects in Area 15. And mainly these focus on fire rehabilitation, which involves herbicide application and reseeding, and pinyon juniper thinning in many areas. And in addition to these restoration projects, there has been some research conducted in Area 15, mainly in the Simpson Parks. Between 2011 and 2014, researchers from NDOW, in concert with University of Nevada, Reno, evaluated mining effects on herds in different areas of Nevada, one of those being the Simpson Park Range. So in the Simpson Parks, 175 deer were collared, 85 of those were adults. And they found that these deer exhibited mostly a resident strategy. And they also found that mining can impact deer movement, especially when it disrupts winter range and migration corridors. So keeping that in mind going forward and continuing to work with mines on mitigation will be important for maintaining this herd in Area 15. So in conclusion, Western states face a suite of challenges, and Area 15 of Nevada is no exception to that. It's a complex interaction of factors that have led to habitat degradation and have caused a decline in the mule deer in Area 15. NDO has completed and planned several projects to address some of these challenges in Area 15, but going forward, working together with multiple stakeholders like we're doing now, to develop more long-term solutions for issues will ultimately allow a productive coexistence on a shared landscape in Area 15. And there's data sources from all my maps if you would like that later. I'll take any questions.
So you're open for questions now?
What was that, Scott?
Are you open for questions now?
Yeah, from panelists.
Okay, and I can't remember the year, but Jeremy Lutz put out all those tags. We had a tremendous deer hood. We were killing nice big bucks, and there was bucks everywhere. And then he upped it up to 900 tags.
Hey, Scott, could you get a little closer to your microphone, or is there something in front of your mic? We're having trouble hearing you.
Okay. Sorry, Tom. I can't remember the year, but the only time I drew a late tag, Jeremy Lutz upped the tags in 15 to 900 tags, and it was ungodly. Ungodly. Everybody was out on the range, and after those 2 or 3 years that he did that, the deer herd plummeted. And before that, we were seeing big bucks, deer everywhere, and you're saying this is because of the drought, and you're saying this is because of the forage on the hillside, or I don't understand. I don't get because I was out there hunting every day, and we were seeing quality bucks. We were seeing lots of animals, and he put out tremendous tags, and the deer herd went down. Now the deer herd's coming back, and I know 2 individuals that are doing a lot of predator control on them and killing a lot of coyotes and killing a lot of stuff. And the deer herd's coming back, and we're starting to see it. So I don't buy all this drought and all this stuff. I don't understand it. I don't get it because I've lived here and I've hunted deer in Area 15 for 50 years. And I hope you guys are hearing me, because I don't buy this. I do not buy what you guys are selling, because the deer herd is coming back, and in Area 15, I know 2 guys that have put a lot of time and money into it. So the feed. I've been here for 50 years. I've seen droughts. I've seen a lot of stuff. And in the last couple of years, the deer herd's coming back in 15. The last couple of years, when Jeremy put all those tags out and destroyed all this stuff, and when you put tags out, figure every tag you put out, there's at least four people hunting. So what are you doing to the countryside?
Yeah, thanks for that comment.
The tag stuff it's got to go away. The tag, if you want to restore this, we got to get back to norm and quit putting out all these tags and let the country rehab itself. That's my opinion.
Thanks for that.
There are a lot of people that support me on that. Okay, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that comment. So it's, yeah, like we were talking about, it's an extremely complicated issue. So, you know, in certain areas, just because one activity is taking place and the herd's coming back doesn't necessarily mean that specific action is the cause. So if we look at all the projects with respect to habitat restoration, we could say those are maybe what's bringing all the deer back, but we don't know that for sure. So there's a lot of really complex things going on that are all interacting. So addressing, again, just that symptom, which is predation, isn't really going to solve the root problem, which is that loss of habitat. And that could be from various factors, like you said, people out on the landscape degrading it just by driving out there hunting. So we're kind of trying to come at this from, I would say, a holistic approach, but trying to get at it from what's actually causing that issue that's exposing these animals more to predators. So removing the predators alone isn't really going to help because more predators are going to move into the area. It's something we'll have to continue doing in perpetuity. But we want to kind of work on these long-term solutions to restore habitat.
Okay, then I got a question.
I don't know if Jeremy or Tom have anything to add.
I got a question. Tom, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If predator control is not going to help, then why do you charge me $10 for predator control on my applications?
Predator
If it's
control.
not going to help, then why are you charging me $10?
That's actually a good question, Scott. And I think the answer to the predator fee portion of that is there are places and instances and situations where predator control absolutely does benefit a resource. That's been proven. I think Sarah put it pretty well. When you're talking about an entire management area and a deer population as large as Area 15, the amount of predator removal you would have to do forever to move the needle is pretty prohibitive. And the fact that if we can improve the habitat, it reduces the effectiveness of the predators is probably a better long-term solution. But nobody's denying that predator control can't have a very beneficial impact in certain situations, whether that's mule deer, bighorn sheep, pronghorn, or anything else. So there are places and times where that is a productive tool. And it may be in Area 15 in some places. And that's why we're having these meetings and we're asking for folks' opinions and talking about all these things. I don't think Sarah meant that it isn't an effective tool. I think she's looking more at a long-term solution because the level of that predator control we would have to do to move the needle on an entire mule deer population of this size would be pretty prohibitive. But I don't want to take everybody's time. Marshall, you've had your hand up for a while here. Why don't we grab that, and Scott, we can jump back on that.
I ain't taking all the
I
time.
just think in regards to the predator control issue, I'm not suggesting that lions don't eat deer or coyotes don't eat deer. I know they do. I hunt them. However, I also understand that if I were to close my doors and survive on the food that is in my house, eventually in about a couple of months at best, my and my family would be dead because there's nothing to eat. We would run out of food. If there's no young sagebrush, if there's no good bitter brush, if there's none of this good browse that the deer can eat, we could systematically in one shot wipe every single predator out of Area 15. If there's not good food for all that abundance of deer to eat, they're all going to die because they can't ration peanut butter and say this is a 16-ounce can of peanut butter and I need to eat 1 ounce per day so that I can last it for 16 days. They're hungry, so they're going to eat. So those deer are going to muck out whatever food they've got. And if there isn't a regeneration of that because there's no moisture or there's some other factor like the horses patting it down, they can't get to water because there's no rain or something like that, they're going to starve to death. So killing predators is not a problem. It's a good thing. but we can't say that's the only thing that's going to fix it, because if they don't have any food to eat, they don't have any water to drink because of all these other factors, then they're going to die anyway. And I'm not saying that we need to compete with the predators, but we have to fix these other issues and make sure that the deer can survive regardless of how many predators are there.
Yeah, appreciate those comments too, Marshall. Chris, you had your hand up a minute ago.
Yeah. So yeah, Marshall, I agree with what you're saying there. I mean, predators are something that has to be managed on the landscape, just like we're managing the deer populations as well. But yeah, we can wipe out everyone and still not going to solve the problems of predators. One question I had, Sarah, was, did I catch it correctly on one of your slides that there have been about 21,000 acres worth of rehabilitation work done? And if so, was that just work that NDOW has been doing, or did that include work that BLM has done as well?
Yeah, that was just projects that NDOW has completed since 2009. I was hoping to get some information out of BLM for how much they have done with respect to acreage on the landscape, but unfortunately I couldn't get that in time for this meeting. So I'm still hoping to get that information at some point, but that was just what NDOW has done.
Yeah, it seemed a bit small. That's why I just wanted to clarify that point. Second question: is there any good data sets on how many acres we think we have lost to pinyon juniper encroachment within Area 15? I know we had the 500,000 acres that have burned over the last 15 to 20 years, but do we have any estimates on early phase 1 and phase 2 pinyon juniper encroachment across Area 15?
I think I'll refer to Jeremy on that one since he's the habitat bio.
Yeah, USGS, they actually have some GIS layers that depict how many acres are in that phase 1 and phase 2. And we actually use that as a tool when we are coming up with our PJ treatments, Chris. I don't have that number right at hand, but we do have that layer.
Yeah, that's just really quick, and then I see Bert has his hand up. But really, that to me, those are a lot of those areas that are that low hanging fruit for a lot of areas around northern Nevada. But really, those are the areas that still have that sagebrush cover and still have some amount of browse in them and are still economical to treat. So if we know how big of those areas are, we can start hopefully prioritizing more and more of those to knock those back today. So 50 years from now, we're not talking about another 400,000 acres that's been lost to tall browse species because it's all phase 3 encroachment.
Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, we've been doing a pretty good job on that, with BLM. Of course, you're always bound on any kind of the NEPA clearances that are available to do the treatment projects on. But as you know, there is some of those new secretarial orders that allow us to do a lot of thinning under a categorical exclusion, which is going to make it a lot easier to do these habitat treatments. So funding doesn't seem to be an issue, and it seems like it's becoming a lot easier to do these treatments. So we're going to see a lot more PJ thinning done in Lander County.
Thank you.
Hey, so my 2 cents here. So it's definitely a multifaceted problem. I don't think that necessarily one in particular thing has caused all the problems, but a couple things that I have for thought is, one is Area 15 has to be looked at slightly different than these other areas, because as you guys said, it's kind of a donut hole. These deer aren't migrating. We aren't getting a refill from a migration. And to Scott's point, I think that is the concern with any tags. Now, as some of your guys' graph charts and everything else showed, the tag issuing probably is not the key problem. Jeremy's seeing what he's seeing. He's doing his job, and nobody's here to. I'm definitely not here to take shots at him for that. But I think that it needs to be considered when we are issuing them. And that's been one of the key things to the doe herd. Is I've lived in Lander County my whole life. I've been outdoors all the time, and there's certain places where these people have seen, they have the same 9 does that come to their field every year. And then, we issue a few tags and people knock down 3. And next thing now you only have your 6 does that are coming to the field for the next few years because we just don't get the migration. I think that's something that needs to be considered. The horses, I think, are more hell on the habitat, and I can send some videos if you guys would like, of the horses just meleeing things. I'd made this suggestion to Tom and to Sarah when I was talking about getting some raven permits this last week about, we are in the 20th century. There's no reason why we can't put a solar well on top of one of these plateaus and pipe water for miles and miles, to 6, 7, 8 different water sources instead of depending on a guzzler and some raining. And maybe even, at the very bottom of it, put a trough that would water some horses where they aren't in our riparian areas and pounding that into the ground. These are, and that's minimal maintenance for that. Fresh water spreads the animals out over a bigger, wider range where they can forage and find some more of that forage, mainly because there's not enough water here, especially after we had a dry summer like this last summer. And the last thing is a question is, do we have any data on the cattle numbers that were out in the 80s when we had our peak mule deer? Where do we stand on what we were grazing back then? And now I know that, back then everybody ran around and had a rifle in their back of their cab, and also they were using 1080 and they were poisoning everything. Every sheep man was killing everything. And I'm not saying that was a good thing, because they got every eagle that came in and landed and they got everything. But the predator prey balance was slightly different. And with that, it changes the dynamic of everything, because there was a different time back then. They kept the horses fairly thin all by themselves. There was a little bit of self-management that took place there. Knowing we're in a different time, but I think that what I'm trying to get out of this is I want to, gain a bunch of knowledge on what's going on with the deer, and possibly, do something, take a little heat off you, Sarah, and your tag issuing in the future, because I don't want to see you getting kicked around when it's not a fair shake for you. So that's just my personal 2 cents, and I'll shut up now.
Yeah, Scott, you got your hand up there?
The last thing I have to say is I am the chairman of the Wildlife Commission Board in Lander County. The only people I see that's on this screen at my meetings is Sarah and Tom. If this is a big deal, where's the other people at? We have a meeting Monday night, 6:30 at the courthouse. We will be there. If you guys want to discuss this stuff, we are all ears. We are all about Lander County, but I don't see any of these people ever showing up. And that's all I got to say. That's all I got to say. We post them at 4 different places. We have about 5 to 6. Tom, you know more than this than I do, but 5 to 6 a year. We have meetings, and none of these guys show up. And I would like to see you guys there if you're interested in it, and if you really are concerned about it. Oh, sorry, Jerry. I know you're there. Jerry Annis is there most of the time. I would like to see you guys there, because this is a big deal.
Hey, Scott.
Yes,
I'm having trouble hearing you, but is there any way that you can make them meetings where people can virtually attend?
I can't even figure out how to turn a computer on.
And the only reason I ask is I'm not sure. Sarah, can you guys even show up to meetings right now currently? Or are you guys restricted in any way?
Pretty sure we still have some. Tom would know more, but I think it's up to our discretion as long as there's social distancing and precautions taken to attend. But if that's not the case, then it's going to attend virtually.
We have not enough people to show up that we could probably put you at 30 feet apart. You know that, Sarah. There's not enough people that attend these meetings. You can sit 30 feet apart. I will talk to my wife. because she's the computer person in my family. And if we can do this Zoom stuff, I'm game, whatever you want. But I would love to have more interaction, especially with this group that we got here.
Yep.
Because
No, I think that's a good point, Scott. And I think, putting that out there and making them aware of the county advisory board meetings is probably a good stroke, because obviously they're interested and good platform. Jerry, I saw you with your hand up back there.
Yes, thanks for the segue, Scott. I usually, in the acknowledgement, I usually go to those meetings to watch the interaction between the president and the secretary of that group.
Really, Jerry? Come on.
No, not really. I go to those meetings because, and you'll learn from dealing with me with this group, that I'm really focused on promoting a coordinated approach to habitat issues. And I am a member of the Lander County Conservation District, and we have, as most of you know, we have funding available and projects that have been completed, and we're always looking for projects. But I know that Scott's group gets out on the ground, and so I like to go and visit with them about what they see and what we may be able to help with. But I think that as we move along, and as a group, I believe it looks like eventually we'll be getting down to 3 key points that we'd like to address and how to do that. And I think the how to get it done is going to come through cooperation with a lot of different groups, with Scott's group, with the CD, with NDOW, BLM, private landowners. I think are a big potential. The mines, don't want to leave the mines out. And so I kind of see this as I'm really interested to see where we go. I don't have any answers, but with good open conversation, I think we can focus on those priorities and start chipping away at the issues. So I'm glad to see everybody, the diversity of opinions and input on these groups. And Scott, I'm going to be at your meeting Monday night. I have it on my calendar. And I'm hoping you'll be at. I'm hoping that you will be at my meeting, the CD meeting on February 9th, because this type of conversation is exactly what we're going to be focused on that night.
Jerry, I think my wife has your email.
Yeah.
Send her your schedule on your meetings, and either me or her will attend. If I don't have to work, I will attend. If I have to work, she will attend. And I agree with you. We need to have
yeah, we'll do it.
Get
right.
Everybody together.
All right, guys. I hate to. This is exactly the kind of dialogue we're hoping for. Kind of open dialogue, a lot of opinions. We do need to get tonight's kind of kickoff meeting rolling. That was pretty good segue yourself, Jerry. I'm gonna, if we can, move along now. What I'd like to do is give a quick overview, maybe a little more detail than we gave in that statewide kind of kickoff meeting a month ago or so, about the actual process, what this is going to look like moving forward, where we're at now, and kind of what we're doing. I'm surrounded by computer monitors. I swear this isn't my real complexion. I'm not sick or anything. But what we're doing, as Sarah mentioned earlier, when we first started developing this idea, we didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. We did know we wanted a lot of local participation, more of a kind of a grassroots effort, with local stakeholders from various walks of life to get as many, opinions and perspectives as we possibly could. In order to facilitate this moving along and be able to go through kind of a prioritization process and get approval for things, it turned out that this ended up being a commission process. So we actually have what is, I guess, referred to as a Mule Deer Enhancement Program Oversight Committee, which is a committee of the Board of Wildlife Commissioners. So they will ultimately be looking at a lot of the projects and the proposals coming out of these local groups. And then the same way we're going to rank some of these limiting factors and projects, they will look at it from a statewide basis and prioritize on a statewide basis what they feel is the most important or maybe biggest bang for the buck or most beneficial at that time. And then we'll be moving forward with those. But, you know, ultimately it's going to that group, but I think they're planning on sharing the wealth. I don't think anybody's going to be left out. So I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of productive projects over time in every area in the state. Of course, these groups, every mule deer management area in the state has this exact same process going on. They have teams of local representatives and stakeholders. So Area 15 is one of many. It's a pretty big effort. It's been probably a long time in coming. I'm pretty excited about it. And I know there's a lot of other folks that are too. But anyway, what the plan is in upcoming meetings here, which will probably start taking place February and March, we'll be looking at, I'm going to share my screen here. We are going to be, as we mentioned, can everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, so this is the wrong one is what that is. How about this one? Can you see that one? Did it change?
It stayed the same, but I think that looked like Area 15, Tom.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to start with the mule deer limiting factor ranking sheet. So this should be kind of where we're kicking this off, and this is where the conversations will start. You know, and that's why Sarah gave that presentation on some of the challenges that are, you know, going on with Area 15 mule deer herd, and of course, west-wide, statewide. There's this list from wildfire to water distribution, migration corridor impacts, wild horses, you know, direct human impacts, indirect human impacts, disease, you know, policies and regulations, predation, you name it. And of course, you know, there's others that we could probably add on there as we think about them. But what we're going to be asking folks to do between now and the next meeting is kind of start thinking about, you know, what you think might be, you know, some of the most limiting factors, the highest priority ones, the ones that are having the greatest impact. Some we can do something about, some we can't. I mean, but don't let that stop you. If you think, man, climate and current weather patterns and, you know, yeah, we're getting a lot of precipitation, but is it at the right time of year, whatever? That may be the number one limiting factor for a mule deer herd someplace in the West. It's worth ranking, at least put that in context. And, you know, we may not be able to do anything about it. So maybe we move on to number two. But start thinking about these things. We're not going to send this list out yet. I think the Oversight Committee is still looking at this and potentially refining it. But just start thinking about all these things Sarah talked about. And then what we will do after those conversations, that may take one meeting, it may take four. We were hoping to get out and do some actual on the ground field trips, maybe look at some impacts out there from wildfire, look at some rehab we've done, look at impacts from wild horses, you name it. Of course, the whole COVID situation may make that, not to mention the fact that we're now in the middle of winter and it's going to be a little muddy and potentially a little snowy for a couple months, but doesn't mean we can't get out on the ground and look at some stuff this spring and talk about it. Once we have everyone every member of this panel will be asked to rank those limiting factors. And what we'll do is we'll average those, we'll put them together, kind of combine all the sheets, and with an average, we'll come up with area 15, what the top 3 limiting factors we believe are in area 15. And then we'll go to this needs assessment. And this is a list. Of course, it's not comprehensive. We can also add to this. But depending on what those limiting factors are, there's some options here for some things we can do to address them. For example, if it's wildfires when I switched that, can you all see that now? Needs assessment.
No, you're still in the limiting factor sheet.
You'd think I'd be better at this. Well, you might not think I would. Okay. So I think this is the needs assessment. Yeah. So anyway, as an example, if the potential limiting factor, one of them came out to wildfire and invasives, what can we do about it? Planting, can we do some native seeds, some shrub plantings, some rehab that way? Can we put some, herbicides out to try and target cheatgrass or other annual invasives? Can we put green strips out? So each one of those limiting factors has some ways to address them here. And like I say, we can always think out of the box. Wildlife health and disease, tag numbers, disease testing, what's the age structure out there, predation, targeting mountain lions, some kind of predator research. Are predators actually in impacting the Area 15 herd? Maybe a deer coloring study. So there's all kind of things we can choose as our priority projects to address our top limiting factors. So once we get to that point, then we would send those up to that Oversight Committee. They would get those from every area in the state, and they'd take a look at them and start prioritizing. And it will be up to this group, and it'll primarily fall, of course, on NDOW to maybe start chasing some funding for some of those projects that are getting approved at the commission level, and just see where it goes. But it's a way to engage locals, folks with more local knowledge about the resource, gets a variety of opinions and perspectives. We didn't want to just come in and say, this is what we need to do. We've done that a lot. We think we know what's going on a lot of times, but we really are hoping that, this process will maybe, point us in a new direction, or some folks will come up with some different opinions and perspectives that we may have overlooked, or some ways to address things that maybe we haven't thought of. Marshall? Oh, you're muted.
A thought that came into my mind, like with Area 15, as big as it is, it's not like, Area 192 or something, right? Is there a way that we can break some of this up into different priorities? For example, like 156 doesn't have much water and there's a ton of PJ. Or the Simpson Parks, the north end has a lot of water and it also has a lot of horses. And then, the Shoshones are kind of like a mix of everything. And there's just so much going on in all these different units within the area that it seems like something that might work, say, for example, trying to do predator control in the Simpson Parks. And then, okay, well, if we do that for all of Area 15, is that necessarily going to make a difference in 156 where there aren't a whole bunch of deer because there's no water and there's no feed? Just wondering.
Yep, no, that's a really good point, and that's a good discussion to have. I think right now we're trying to look at a little, the overall mule deer population in 15, and for lack of a better way to put it, maybe the biggest bang for our buck. So, where is our best opportunity to improve the health of the herd? Like, in what unit, what mountain range, doing what project do we think would have the biggest impact? And like you say, it could be different everywhere, but if we pick our top limiting factors, and when we start doing these projects, we'll absolutely be targeting specific areas. So if our top three come out to be wildfire and invasives, and then maybe, water availability and lack of diversity, those can be specific to units and say, man, we need to do this in the Shoshones, we need to do this in the Battle Mountains, and we need to do this in the Simpson Park. So I totally get it. And this is already going to be, a huge challenge to get all this stuff done. And we're going to have to start, with a pretty broad view, because the commission's already going to be tasked with looking at 1 million projects because of every area in the state's going to be coming up with these. But I think that's an important conversation, and we should probably have that at the next meeting and say, hey, what maybe couple of units in Area 15 are the most important? What are the core herd areas? Where would we, be able to make the biggest impact? Maybe don't waste your time in some, little range of hills, someplace that doesn't really contribute much to the population. But what can we do in a place like the Simpson Parks that supports a larger proportion of that herd? So really good conversation that we should probably have, Marshall. Jerry?
You got me? Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
What I'd like to interject at this time is, Tom, your statements make it sound like NDOW is going to do all of this. And I think what we need to do is realize that it's not just NDOW. There are so many other opportunities to make a difference out there. I listed some of them earlier. I neglected to mention the county. Lander County is a huge supporter, financial supporter through the conservation district of habitat enhancement. And so I think I'd like to talk about the potential for educating the interested public on what the many different options are for habitat enhancement, and not make people think that, well, if NDOW doesn't do it, it's not going to get done. So just want to throw that out there for consideration going forward.
Yep. No, and that's another really good point too that you bring up, Jerry, and that could benefit this process in a couple ways. There will be some things that maybe this group comes up with that they think are priorities that ultimately don't get prioritized by the commission through that process. There's nothing saying that, money can't be pursued through some other, entity or source to get that work done. And this is going to be a really valuable process to identify some things. And it's not limited to the commission and what they approve necessarily funding wise. And it also, county monies, there's a lot of other pots of monies that could be used to leverage money when we maybe do get approved for a project through the Heritage Fund or the, some other funds, whether they're federal, state, or anything else. If the county or other folks would like to throw in, good way to leverage those monies too. So yeah, absolutely not. The intent is not to limit it, strictly to internal channels or funds or anything else. I'm glad you brought that up.
Hey, Tom, is there any kind of list of what the commission will be looking at for consideration of projects, or is it just kind of wide open? I mean, is it, if somebody were to add money to it, does that put it higher up on their scale to possibly get it done, or what considerations are they taking?
That is a fantastic question for that committee. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, and I don't know what kind of influence it would be if a group came forward and said, hey, we already have $75,000, sitting there that somebody else is committed to run with this project. That might indeed influence the commission or the committee. But yeah, that would totally be up to them. Hopefully we'll get a little more information. I'm hoping for another potentially a statewide kind of meeting again. Get a little better direction from the committee or the ins and outs of that stuff. Actually, I just, a little birdie told me that, yes, that the more partners that'll come in on a project and the more money that, can be ear tagged for those projects will likely increase the priority level of that project. That's, one other kind of a administrative thing. We're kind of operating here a little loosely. I believe we are going to have a chairperson that will be appointed for this committee, and I don't know how that's going to happen. That's going to be up to the larger committee, and I don't know if that's something that will be, a chairperson will be appointed by that committee, or if they will say, the subcommittee should maybe elect a chairperson or what have you. But that will be coming up. So we will end up having an official chairperson. That chairperson, ultimately would be responsible for, making sure agendas get posted and all that stuff, which of course, no matter who that is, we'll get plenty of support from NDOT. But like I say, this turned into a little more formal of a commission process than we initially intended. So I could go on forever and just keep repeating myself, which I typically do, but I won't do that right now. And if there's more questions about that stuff, we'll tackle them. Otherwise, I think we'll do another public comment period. I think, Sarah, are we on the clock for? Oh, Chris?
Yep, just one more thought for Sarah. When we move into one of our future meetings, I think it would be very helpful if we, if we knew what total list of projects were kind of already slated and on the books moving forward within these management zones. And the reason I say that is, let's just hypothetically say that BLM was already planning 300,000 acres worth of PJ treatments throughout Area 15. It would be good to know that so that we're not focusing everything there for projects that are already slated to move forward and can focus on other areas that may be additional limiting factors for Mule there.
Yep, absolutely. And that's another good point. And again, missed that one. That will absolutely, again, raise the priority of a project. If there's a project that already has NEPA either in place or that's started and it's in progress, that's absolutely going to put up the priority list for that oversight committee. We're not going to want to wait on a project. Yeah, it's a great project, but NEPA hadn't even been thought of, when there may be some waiting in the wings that'll accomplish the same thing that are already moving. So,
Hey, Tom,
yeah.
Is there any chance that since this is so early in this process that we could possibly get somebody from the BLM to maybe join in on this so we can get a little, they can share in some of this fun?
Yeah, that's the intent. There's been a little bit of a bog down in how exactly we're going to make that ask and who all is going to reach out to who, but the intent is to have BLM, forest, whenever that the land management agencies that, are in the area. So there'll be a lot of them that are maybe primarily BLM, but forest, NRCS, a lot of other partners will be part of this process. Due to some of the restrictions they have, they may or may not be allowed to, participate as voting members on these types of local groups. I think a lot of that depends on their policies, but they will absolutely, hopefully in the following meetings, be at the table and participants.
I think if there's no more questions right now, we'll go ahead and take that 3 minutes for public comment and then make a motion to move on. So we'll start. And one more time, I forgot again to say the email address. But if you do have public comment, please email endowgame@gmail.com.
All right. Looks like we're back. We had a single public comment. Commissioner Shane Rogers said he appreciated the informative presentation and dialogue and looks forward to working with the subcommittee on this important initiative. That's the only public comment we received.
Commissioner who?
Rogers, Shane Rogers.
Okay, and I guess real quickly, before we move on, I just want to remind everyone that if you do attend the CAB meeting, we can't actually have any discussions about the Mule Deer Enhancement Program stuff there, because then we would have to announce that in advance and then go through the whole process of the open meeting laws again. So just be sure that we're not having any gatherings of a quorum outside of this team and these meetings. So I guess with that, I'll just do we need a motion to move on to the next item?
Motion.
I don't think we need a motion to move on to the next agenda item, no.
Right.
Which I think is just adjournment, isn't it?
I think, did we need to do another longer public comment period, or was that the public comment period?
No, that was the final public comment period of the meeting.
I'll make a motion. we
Okay.
adjourn.
Wait, can I make one statement first?
Go ahead.
Wildlife Commission Advisory Board meeting, Monday night, 6:30, county building, public meeting. I would love to see all you guys there. That's all I gotta say.
Appreciate it, Scott.
Have a good night, guys.
I would make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second it.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. And I will reach out to schedule the next meeting via email.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.